Let's turn now to the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Annabel Denham. So let's have a look what's on some of those front pages. And looking ahead to Her Majesty's funeral, the Express proclaims, "Farewell, our glorious Queen." The Mail calls it our last farewell. The Metro says, "Now carry her home." And the Telegraph pays tribute to what it calls a life of selfless service. The Star describes the country as a kingdom united. Charles gives thanks, referring to that statement from the new king tonight. That's the Times. The Eye references the global scale of the occasion. Likewise, the Guardian mentions the presence of those many foreign leaders. And just a reminder that by scanning the QR code on the screen now, during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you are watching. And as I say, we're joined by Zoe Williams, The Guardian, and Annabel Denham. Thanks both. Annabel, first of all, The Telegraph has the new picture released tonight by Buckingham Palace, and the headline, "A Life of Selfless Service," which I guess just about sums it up.
Yes, it does, indeed. I mean, it's the final portrait as well, of course, that will ever be taken of the Queen. I think you have that portrait of her beaming on the cover of many newspapers, and almost a contrast, really, with the headline, "A Life of Selfless Service," because she did have a life of selfless service, and she did it often with a smile on her face, and that's what's really coming out of those front pages there. I believe she's wearing she's wearing blue. She's wearing a brooch that was given to her when she was 18. Again, you know, she lived until she was 96, and for the vast majority of those years, she was our Queen. So it's not surprising that that's on the cover of the papers, that final portrait.
And Zoe, I mean, the papers have been remarkable, haven't they, the last few days, really? The images and the pictures, I mean, devoting page after page to just very, you know, impressive, spectacular photographs.
Yeah, I mean, it has been interesting to watch the newspapers because there's always, generally speaking, papers are trying to distinguish themselves from one another. So it's very difficult from a news standpoint when they're all doing the same message with the same photo. And you did find at the very beginning that there was a kind of split between the papers, between the ones who are using a very young photo and the ones who are using a very current photo. Obviously, the regular kind of rule is that you use the most recent photo, but it was felt that those younger photos were so impactful precisely because they really drove home just how long the reign had been. Now, I think that you're not going to find much dissent on the front pages.
No, and the Express also, I mean, fills its front page with that same image of a smiling Queen, and clearly this is the image that the family wanted out tonight.
Yes, one expects so, and I think also over the last couple of days we've perhaps seen some newspapers cover other stories on their front pages, whereas it's not altogether surprising that tomorrow, on the day of her funeral, the vast majority have these single shots of the Queen. Let's not forget that by Tuesday, the news agenda, you know, news is relative, and by Tuesday, the news agenda will in part have moved on. Of course, there'll be coverage of tomorrow's funeral, this momentous day that has been planned for some time now and is going to see foreign dignitaries and leaders descend on London. Well, they've already descended on London in huge numbers. It's a day-long event, of course, ending with that private service, but much of it will be televised, and expected 4 billion people are going to tune in. So it's a huge event. You can expect that it will be covered in Tuesday's papers at length, but I think this may be the last time that we see those full shots, the portrait of the Queen on the cover.
Papers are going to be thinking that this is a kind of once or twice in a lifetime occasion on which people are going to keep the paper to remember the event by. You know, it's like people don't tend to keep newspapers, but they'll probably, most people will keep their newspaper from the day of the Queen's funeral. So it's got to be impactful, but at the same time, it has to be, you know, it has to do exactly the respectful job it has to do. So, I mean, I think they've tried a decent balance, and I think you can tell a lot about the readers from the way they've done it. I mean, you can look at the Express and think that's exactly the cover the Express readers will want.
I mean, there have been so many days when the front pages have been, you know, front pages that people might want to keep. It's been, you know, the day after her death was announced. We've got today, tomorrow's, you know, Tuesday's papers will be. I'm interested, Zoe, that The Guardian, probably more than most other papers over the last 9 or 10 days or so, have gone for other stories. I mean, on the front page, the cost of living and Ukraine, stories which, you know, have tended to be on the inside of other papers.
Well, I mean, that will be about readership, and it will be about editorial values, right? So there have been a load of really important environmental stories this week, and it would be against the values of the paper, but also, you know, arguably against the values of the royal family to prioritise this event for 10 days when you had such kind of momentous news from Pakistan, you had such huge news from the IPCC, and none of it good. There is a kind of, you know, the newspapers have to make a call when there's in a period of national mourning, whether they're going to completely jettison all other serious content. And some newspapers did make that call, but, you know, not all newspapers were ever going to make that call.
I should just say, I'm getting news in my ear that the queue has finally closed. So there is no point now in turning up at the beginning of that queue, because the queue has closed. Those in it will still be able to, over the next few hours, be able to see the Queen lying in state, but there's no point now turning up at the beginning of that queue. And I mean, it's been astonishing, hasn't it?
Well, and also, you know, we're talking about how newspapers have been covering this and repeatedly, day after day, over the last nearly 2 weeks, trying to find new angles, new ways of covering this very, very big story. And I think that the queue in the middle of the past week actually did give newspapers a bit of a fresh angle, a new way of approaching it. And I don't think that anybody perhaps expected that the queue was going to be so long. I think it's the longest queue that has ever been in history, at least that we know about. So it's enabled newspapers to change up their coverage a little bit and really put forward you know, this outpouring of grief that's come from the public, just how much the Queen meant to the public. You know, I think it's wonderful that the British people have been willing to stand for hours. Some people with perhaps disabilities, some people who are septuagenarians, octogenarians, standing in that queue for overnight to go and see the Queen as she.
Yeah, so there we are. That's on the website. The queue to attend the lying in state is at final capacity and now closed to new entrants. Please do not attempt to join the queue. But it's been astonishing. The queue, capital letters, had its own Twitter feed. It was on Instagram. People were filming themselves in the queue. Some people did it twice, I read today. So what do you put it down? Oh, look, clearly people are going for different reasons. What do you account for this?
Actually, it's interesting. There has been already some sociological research on it by these University of Sussex researchers, which found that it's a slightly more complicated picture than a kind of queue of mourning. People join things because they enjoy the sensation of being part of something, and that's been huge. So there, you know, while everybody there was certainly a monarchist, while it was predominantly a Conservative crowd, it was 52% Conservative, so it was not overwhelmingly so. It had a really good age split. It was 59% female, But generally speaking, right up until the age when you really wouldn't want to sit on a pavement, you had a really good distribution across the generations. And a lot of people, you know, there was a kind of splice between wanting to feel part of something and wanting to kind of give voice to some amorphous gratitude. And that did foster a really good atmosphere, right? Because if people are going for those reasons, if it's a kind of communitarian and also grateful vibe, then that's not going to be a bad queue. That's not going to be like an airport queue.
No.
But there was a real sense of camaraderie as well, wasn't
yes,
there?
Yes, there was.
In
My
the
daughter
queue
was
and
in it.
people
She
telling...
said it was amazing camaraderie.
Yes.
And that I think it took her 9 hours or so. But she said, I'm not really a monarchist, she said, but I just wanted to be there because it was a moment in history.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly it. That's exactly what the researchers found. It wasn't particularly fervent, you know, monarchism. Just
forgive me for a moment. Let's go to Matthew Thompson, who I think is at the back of the queue. I think, Matthew, so it's closed. What's the scene down there?
No longer the back of the queue, because the queue is no more. Finally, the queue has closed after 5 days of queuing. We've been here throughout. There were still quite a lot of people left in the queue by the time they tried to shut it off. To be fair, they did try and get as many people through as possible, but it was clear by about an hour or two ago that there just wasn't going to be enough time to get everybody through. We know that the queue takes about 8 hours to get from where we are now, basically by London Bridge, all the way to Westminster. We know also that the Queen has to be cleared out of Westminster Hall so that the funeral can take place tomorrow by 6:30. So the simple mathematics meant that they had to close the queue around now, and they've done so. The queue is finally closed. Lots of very disappointed people, saw a few people quite emotional about it. One person not that emotional, but a little bit disappointed, as Lauren, who's agreed to speak to us very quickly. Just your thoughts on missing out by a whisker.
Yeah, literally. If we went the wrong way as well, so if we didn't go the wrong way, we would have probably made it in time.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, absolutely gutted. We went across the bridge rather than straight over. So it's a shame, but...
How long were you waiting to get to this point, if you don't mind me asking?
I think around 2 hours.
OK. So you hadn't been waiting sort of 6 hours, it would have been slightly more galling.
Yeah, definitely.
But it must be...
It is frustrating.
Within touching distance.
Because we didn't have a chance.
Can I ask why you left it
We
so
didn't have
late?
a chance. We did literally work and other commitments. We just, last minute, hoping. It didn't work, so...
What are you going to go and do now? Drown your sorrows?
I don't know. Go and have a coffee and sit down.
Rest your weary legs.
And we just take a walk around, take the views. So.
Have you come far out of London?
Luton.
From Luton, OK.
Yeah, so not too
a while, but not, you haven't come from Land's End or John O'Groats.
No, not too far,
Well, look, commiserations.
Thank you.
Are you going to stick around for the funeral tomorrow, perhaps? Are you going to see any of that, or...?
I'm not sure. I'd like to, but I'm not sure. We'll see. We might. We've talked about it, but I'm not sure.
Depends how many wines you drown your sorrows with tonight.
Exactly.
Good stuff. Look, I'll let you get on. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So there you have it. Finally, the queue is at an end. I feel like I've spent most of my life here over the last week, but it is clearly not for the many people still in it, many thousands of people actually still in it, because they're going to be waiting overnight. The queue itself will stop letting people in around 6 o'clock in the morning, but it is closed as of now to any new entrants.
OK, Matthew, thank you very much indeed. I saw it said yesterday that the nation is divided into those in the queue, those watching people in the queue, and now you've got those who missed the queue. So the queue story goes on. But what do you think it says about the country or the monarchy? Can we,
well,
really...
A lot of people were trying to draw a kind of patriotic stroke exceptionalist case that it just meant that we particularly liked queuing. And there is that's certainly the kind of British cliche that we like queuing anyway. A kind of abnormal queue is likely to be abnormally attractive to us. I think it probably is exactly the same reason your daughter joined it. It's a moment to mark, and if you want to kind of tell the grandchildren where you were, that's the place to tell them where you were.
Yeah, and you have stories to tell as well. People have taken to social media, and friends I know who've been in the queue will tell you about the roller coaster of emotions that they had, starting off and feeling really excited. An hour in, they're tucking into the snacks. 2 hours in, they're starting to wonder if they've made a huge error, but determined to, you know, continue and wait. And then, of course, when you actually enter into Westminster Hall, the phones go away, the social media is completely forgotten, and you're there for this moment of solemnity, of calm. And, you know, it's a really, I understand from those who've been there, a really sort of profound experience, but perhaps not one that they were expecting when they were actually in the queue.
And we saw images today of several world leaders who didn't queue or join the queue as such, clearly, but they did go and pay their respects. The Guardian front page, world leaders descend as nation prepares for grandest of farewells. And it's difficult to think of another person who would have been able to gather this number
it's unbelievable.
of world leaders to their funeral.
You wouldn't be able to list the world leaders who are going. It would be much, much quicker to list the kind of handful who weren't going. And I really do feel for the Met particularly, and for anybody involved in security of any kind, because it's such a high jeopardy event. You know, even having Biden in the same room as Macron is like a complete kind of, it's really out of the ordinary what a challenge this poses.
And these world leaders and dignitaries, many of them have actually gone far beyond protocol, so it's possible that the extent of this was unexpected. So there would have been a huge amount of planning and preparation that went into it, but were they really aware that it would be on this scale? I don't know.
Yeah. And we're looking at President Biden there. Now, he's one of the few leaders, I think, who is allowed a motorcade. The rest are going to the funeral, well, effectively by bus. Well, I think
I've seen loads of motorcades.
No, well, I think maybe today.
But maybe it was just Biden going hither and thither.
That you see here, you've got the Beast arriving at the palace. That's not President Biden's car, and you've got the buses arriving, and apparently tomorrow a lot of them are going to have to go together by bus, which could be an interesting study in diplomacy, if nothing else. But it'd be interesting to see. But it is, I mean, it's a diplomatic nightmare, the whole thing, isn't it? If you've got to seat people on buses, you've got to then seat them at the funeral. Who do you sit next to who?
And these issues of protocol have probably never come up, you know, between Norway and Sweden, who's meant to walk first. I bet you that's never come up. But, you know, I'm sure everybody will be gracious about it, because they wouldn't have arrived if they didn't think it wasn't about them.
And it's a serious point for King Charles, because a lot of conversation about the Queen's soft power. Well, he had a reception here, behind us here tonight, and what an opportunity for the new king. I'm sure he knows most of them anyway. He's a 73-year-old man, and he's been around for a long time, but important.
Yes, I mean, he's had a very long apprenticeship, hasn't he, preparation for the role. You're right, this isn't just saying farewell to the Queen, this is also an introduction to the new king, many of whom, as you say, Charles may have met in the past, but not in this role. And he's going to be trying to establish what sort of relationship he will have with them in the future, and try to ensure there's some continuity of that soft power that the Queen had. The Queen had to such an extent that we have these 500 dignitaries and leaders descending on London for her funeral. No, it's quite an extraordinary event, and one suspects not one that will be repeated, certainly in our lifetimes, if ever again.
No. And we've got, you know, still trying to think of anybody who would... Mandela, I suppose, possibly. Churchill, possibly, would have attracted this kind of number of world leaders. But it's extraordinary to think the people that she is gathering here. There's the eye, world's farewell to Elizabeth II,